Robby, what's on your radar?
Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old who shot and killed two men during the riots in Kenosha, Wisconsin last summer, was acquitted on Friday. Prosecutors had charged him with first-degree reckless homicide, first-degree intentional homicide, attempted first-degree intentional homicide, and 2 counts of first-degree recklessly endangering safety. But the jury was persuaded by Rittenhouse's argument that he acted in self-defense. Now, for anyone who had followed the trial closely, this outcome is, frankly, unsurprising. The prosecution simply did not meet its burden of proof, as we discussed on this show numerous times, and Rittenhouse's defense team presented considerable evidence that he reasonably feared for his life each time he pulled the trigger. A witness testified that Joseph Rosenbaum, the first man shot by Rittenhouse, had threatened Rittenhouse's life and was attempting to wrest control of Rittenhouse's AR-15. The second man, Anthony Huber, struck Rittenhouse with a skateboard, and the third man, Gage Grosskreutz, who survived, admitted on the stand that he had first pointed his own gun at Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse shot him in response to this perceived threat. As former Representative Justin Amash, a Republican turned libertarian, put it, the Rittenhouse case was a clear case of self-defense based on the evidence presented. The initial media narrative was false. Justice prevailed. Indeed, people who did not follow the trial closely and instead relied on secondhand punditry from liberal media figures probably missed some very basic facts about the case, including that it had little to do with race. Rittenhouse and all 3 of his victims were white. This is an important point that some mainstream media coverage continues to miss. At MSNBC, for instance, Jahan Jones, a writer for show host Joy Reid's blog, reacted to the verdict by explicitly saying Rittenhouse's whiteness produced the acquittal. Quote, Rittenhouse is a white teen who abides by white rules, and white people empathetic to those rules seemed poised to insulate him from repercussions. Missouri Congresswoman Cori Bush described the verdict as white supremacy in action. It's white supremacy in action, she said. The accounts of former quarterback Colin Kaepernick and the Black Lives Matter movement made similar statements. Now, these remarks, they reek of ignorance. A jury acquitting a white defendant for killing 2 white men, hardly an example of white supremacy in my book. Perhaps it's not surprising that activists and Democratic politicians, however, would reflexively cite white supremacy in a trial outcome that disappoints Team Blue. But more troubling is the response to the verdict from an organization that should know better, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. In a statement reacting to the verdict, ACLU Wisconsin Interim Executive Director Shady Ali lamented the deep roots of white supremacy in Kenosha that prevented Rittenhouse from being held responsible for his actions. And Brandon Buskey, director of the ACLU's Criminal Law Reform Project, said, Kyle Rittenhouse was a juvenile who traveled across state lines on a vigilante mission, was allowed by police to roam the streets of Kenosha with an assault rifle, and ended up shooting 3 people and killing 2. These are the simple, tragic facts. His acquittal comes after an ACLU investigation exposing how Kenosha law enforcement used violence against protesters and drove them toward white militia groups in ways that escalated tensions and almost certainly led to these shootings, end quote. In a Twitter thread, the ACLU complained that Rittenhouse was not held accountable for his, quote, conscious decision to travel across state lines and injure 1 person and take the lives of 2 people, protesting the shooting of Jacob Blake by police. Of course, it's very important to state it is not illegal to travel across state lines, no matter how many times we hear that statement made about the case. The fact that Rittenhouse wandered outside the boundaries of his home and entered a neighboring municipality was irrelevant to this case. The jury did not agree with, and the facts of the case did not support, the claim that his decision to shoot 3 people was, quote, conscious, in the sense that it was premeditated. He argued that he rationally believed his life was in imminent danger, and the surviving shooting victim provided testimony that supported that argument. One might have expected an organization dedicated to the preservation of civil liberties would not so cavalierly take the side of prosecutors against the concept of self-defense. In the past, the ACLU has done terrific work, shining a light on prosecutorial misconduct, the tremendous power the state has to stack the deck against defendants. The ACLU purports to believe that all people, even the guilty, deserve due process protections. And the organization is evidently outraged by the verdict. The ACLU is outraged that the prosecutor tried to argue that Rittenhouse exercising his Miranda rights was evidence of his guilt. Does that upset them? It should. It is not necessary to elevate Rittenhouse to hero status or to agree with his very poor decision, absolutely poor decision, to involve himself in the Kenosha riots. You don't have to, glamorize that to accept that the prosecution failed to prove the charges against him. Rittenhouse is now a free man, not because of white supremacy or because the criminal justice system failed. Activists, politicians, and media figures who purport to care about civil liberties should work toward empowering other defendants to avail themselves of due process, rather than complain that in this one case, the prosecutors did not get their way. So I was really upset with the ACLU's reaction to this. The ACLU knows better than most that the state has tremendous power to unfairly stack the deck against defendants, that it uses this power often against minority and underprivileged defendants, that the abuse. Prosecutors withhold evidence. They know, they have reason to believe that the defendant is innocent, but they will still pursue charges and then they'll, construct some kind of plea deal. That arrangement deprives people of justice, people who are innocent and people who are guilty, who still deserve justice. And this statement from the ACLU was very much, we don't want to, we know our current supporters are, Team Blue down the line, Team Blue being Team Democratic Coalition, and we don't want to offend them. So how can we construct a statement we got to make it about white supremacy because that's the only thing our people care about.
Oh, I think more than the supporters, I think what you saw in the ACLU's Twitter thread that it posted and the statement that came out was a reflection of the internal civil war going on within the organization. And clearly the ACLU wanted to kind of lead with, or I would love to be a fly on the wall for the conversations that led to the statement, because if you notice, they very carefully said that they were not surprised that he was acquitted. So it's like, okay, you could see both lawyers on both sides,
right? Like
being agreeing that, okay, we can agree to these words. I'm not surprised. Like this, on the one side, I'm not surprised because legally that was the right verdict. The other saying, I'm not surprised because it's a system of white supremacy, and of course this guy is going to get off. So they both agree on that word. Then they had a phrase that said he wasn't held accountable for his actions, and you could see both sides saying, okay, he took a weapon into a very dangerous place.
Right.
2 people died. Another person was shot. He almost lost his own life, which a lot of people forget. Like this could have ended with a 17-year-old boy being killed.
Right.
If, let's say, Jojo Rosenbaum wanted to follow through on his threat to kill him and cut his heart out, and successfully pulled his gun away. Or one of the others had successfully, Grosskreutz had his gun out.
Right.
So,
and he might have been able to successfully argue self-defense if he was prosecuted.
I think he absolutely would have been able to, because from his perception, that was self-defense. And so you can see wondering, how does this happen in a good, decent society and nobody is held accountable for it? This type of thing doesn't seem right. So you could see almost agreeing to that. And then they really leaned into a very fascinating investigation that they did, where they obtained all sorts of internal Kenosha County records that showed that the Kenosha police recruited these right-wing militias, which Rittenhouse was maybe inspired by, but certainly was not part of.
Right.
Recruited them, helped position them in Kenosha, and then tactically drove the protesters into the right-wing militia. And they end up driving this newly homeless, mentally ill man who was previously threatened Rittenhouse, into a cage practically, surrounded by cars. And the police create the confrontation by their own tactical decisions, confrontation that winds up with people dead and with Rittenhouse's life changed, and now acquitted. And so they tried to then put responsibility back on the Kenosha police. And I think that part was very appropriate. And if I were them, I would have leaned into it. Although if I were them, I probably would have gotten shouted down inside their internal meetings. Right. And so it's a reflection of the kind of internal war that's going on.
And they jumped on the state lines thing again. Why? This is not an organization that believes in the sanctity of state lines, right? It's a pro-immigration organization. It's it represents people who cross the border illegally. Like, well, he crossed state lines, so No, you lose your rights. That what?
And the ACLU knows that the state line trope goes back to the attempt to, and the successful effort to criminalize interracial relationships. That's how they threw Jack Johnson in prison.
There you go. Yeah.
And so the state lines thing is weird because it also suggests that if he lived in the suburbs of Kenosha that was not Illinois, that you'd be fine with what he did if he didn't cross a state line. No, your behavior is what it is, regardless of where you traveled to do it ahead of time.
Exactly. Well, we're going to have more discussion of the Rittenhouse case and some other things coming up with Team Rising. Stay tuned for that.